Hi guys. I'm very excited for tonight. We are going to be doing an author talk with Jamie Waggoner about her recent book, Hades, Myth, Magic, and Modern Devotion. I gotta tell you, this book is excellent and I'm really excited to connect with her. And we will talk about it, and you can get a signed copy of it at the Apothecary. So I'll give it a minute just for some people to join, and then hopefully Jamie will join and we can add her to the discussion. And my name is Danielle. I am a co-owner of Amityville Apothecary. And oh, there she is. Hi, Jamie. So if you could just send the invite, I will add you to the conversation. And hopefully everything is good in terms of lighting and sound. So if not, please let me know as we go forward. All right. I'm glad that you're here with us tonight. So yeah, it's gonna be a good discussion. I'm really excited. Hi, Jamie.
Hi.
How you doing?
I'm doing really good, thanks. I'm actually not able to see you. I can hear you, but I'm not seeing anything.
Oh, that's interesting. Are you on Wi-Fi or cellular?
I am on my cellular.
Interesting, because I could see you beautifully. You look great.
Thank you.
Do you want to bounce off and try to come back in?
Um, no, I think I'm okay. Let me see if there's like any little options here that
Oh,
I'm
okay.
not like seeing.
Great,
But
because I mean you're centered and you look lovely. You're just not
thank you.
seeing the split screen.
I can hear you just fine. So
If you're comfortable in proceeding this way, we can do it just through a voice
yeah.
discussion.
Okay.
Okay, good. So I'm Danielle. So I know that you can't see me. So you're speaking with Danielle. Dina has she has the night off, so she'll probably be bouncing on at some point. But we invited you back because unfortunately we had those technical difficulties during the last discussion. So I'm glad you can
Yeah.
join us again.
Well, thank you so much. I very much appreciate the chance to chat with you again.
Absolutely. So I've had the opportunity to dive into this book, and I'm really excited because a previous discussion was with Samantha, who is our resident tarot reader, and she works very, very closely with Hades. And I was excited for both of you to have that camaraderie and discussion in the previous discussion. But you know, as you had shared in your book, you almost were like pushed into learning how to work with Hades, and then you discovered like, oh, I should be working with him. Why don't you tell a little
Yeah.
bit about that, and then I'll add
Yeah.
mine.
Well, so I began working with Hades in 2016. And excuse me, basically, it was because I was on a ritual facilitation team for a witch camp. It was a reclaiming style witch camp in the tradition of Starhawk. And as part of the ritual team, we were responsible for crafting basically 5 days of ritual for the camp. And the theme of the camp was Persephone's descent. So the team, before, in our planning before, we all decided that each of us would take on like one role from that myth, and we would kind of be responsible for researching kind of what's going on behind that particular deity in the myth, what their backstory is, what they're bringing to it. And then once we got on campgrounds, we would kind of carry their energy for the camp, and like sometimes in ritual as well. So I was just kind of waiting to see. I didn't really choose right away. I was just kind of waiting to see what others were going to choose.
Right.
And I thought that because of like the combination of folks in this group, I kind of thought that I would be asked to do Persephone, but we had somebody else that stepped up and wanted to do Persephone, which was wonderful. And I was totally fine with that. But I just waited till the end and nobody picked poor Hades.
he's a pretty powerful role. So
Yeah, I kind of felt bad for him. It's like the last kid picked to be on the team, right?
yeah.
And also, before that, primarily I had worked with goddesses, and more specifically with goddesses of Welsh mythology in the Mabinogion. Um, and I've been a devotee of Ceridwen for many, many years, like over 20 years. So, I was really familiar with sort of like the heavier, more chthonic energies already. So I'm like, oh, Hades will be great. It'll be right up my alley. And so I took it on. And what I found was in trying to prepare for this event, Hades is very mysterious and difficult to find. And there weren't a lot of resources out there that really discussed having a magical or a devotional type of relationship with him.
Yeah.
And even finding primary sources is difficult because he doesn't have like a central myth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so just through trance journey and experimentation, I came up with a few things on my own. But and I went to camp and had an amazing, transformative, life-changing, life-altering experience. But when I got back, I was like, I still don't know. I was like, that was great. It was kind of like, you went on an amazing vacation with someone, but you're not really sure how they might fit into your day-to-day life.
Yeah.
And and so Hades and I kind of danced around each other for another couple of years before I finally decided that this is that this is a deity that I really want to become one of my patrons and that I want to work closely with. And once that happened, I began to study and research him a lot more. And it eventually led to writing this book.
Right.
Because I'm like, there's got to be lots of people out there like me that really want to build a practice with him. And there's a serious lack of resources about how to do that. And even where to find him in mythology, because you have to look at a lot of different things. You can't just go to one story.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating. And, what's so cool about this is you did such a thorough job in this book documenting the history of it, as well as correspondences of Hades and the different players, and explaining who he is, how he came to be, who his siblings are. We'll talk about that. Who the other players and dynamics of the underworld are. You myth bust. And I just think it's so beautiful. But first of all, witch camp sounds awesome. So
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
I want to go to witch camp, even
Yeah, it's a
though
lot
I
of fun.
won't say.
Yeah, it's
I
like
won't say how
witchy,
old
it's
I am.
witchy summer camp for grown-ups. It's amazing.
It's so cool. That's awesome. We'll have to talk more about that. But it's so funny because I came to have this discussion with you because you and Samantha's previous talk literally blew up at the end, like of the hour-long discussion, and it didn't save. So I was like, no, we need to have her back. But as I'm reading this, I also have a background, like a lot of my family and ancestry is Celtic, so I have a familiarity there. But I've always had an affinity to like Archangel Azrael, who is the archangel that helps souls cross. And I have a stellium in the 8th house, which is death and rebirth. And I also have Pluto conjunct my sun, conjunct my midheaven. And Hades is synonymous with Pluto. So
Exactly. Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
so amazing. So I
Yeah.
couldn't help but feel as I was reading, just like you were saying, like unexpectedly, here I am
Yeah.
broadening my understanding and working relationship with Hades. And now I'm like, I think he just called me.
Yeah. I'm very impressed that you have that much of your chart memorized.
Um,
I just have kind of my, the major things, the major placements memorized. And it's interesting. I feel like, I think there's a lot of consciousness coming to light right now, especially about death and dying and transitions. Especially if you think about everything that's happening in the world, there's climate chaos. There's a lot of changes in society and culture. We have multiple ongoing wars that are happening, and we just recently, I wouldn't say we're totally out of a pandemic, but we recently experienced this really big worldwide pandemic. And so, this consciousness of death and dying and transition it's up, to for lack of a better term, in the world right now. And it's kind of bringing to light the fact, well, especially I would say maybe not everywhere, but in the United States, we tend to we're very death avoidant.
Yeah.
We don't want to talk about it. And it's really bringing to light the need for the folks I call death priestesses. Priestess is like priest with an X on the end, so it's like a gender neutral term.
Cool.
Yeah. And so those of us who are called to that type of work and called to the deities and beings that is also their purview, I think that, that it makes sense why that's happening right now.
Yeah, I agree. Through my Reiki master training, I've taken some additional coursework to really focus on helping souls transition and earthbound souls to help them in their transition. So in a similar fashion to taking a death vow, I agree. It's very similarly related, and I really do feel like in American culture and our society, like it is such an avoidant subject, but it's a beautiful part of the entire incarnation here. Like we are all born and none of us are getting out of here alive.
Nope.
So,
We all die.
yeah.
And right now I'm actually, so I have a teaching program called Way of the Weaver. And right now we're in the middle of our winter online module, which is actually on death priestessing. And we just this Monday, we were teaching about the fact that, we often don't think about the fact that death surrounds us all the time. And what I mean by that is like we constantly have to eat to live. So there are all manner of plants and animals that have to die so that we can keep living. And hopefully in the future, we will indeed become compost ourselves, right? And we'll enter that cycle again. So it's just, death is around whether we realize it or not. It's a constant companion.
Yeah, I agree. So that leads me to my next question for the sake of the discussion in our audience that's not as familiar with Hades. Can you just, especially at the beginning of the book, can you just give a quick overview talking about the Titans and what happened with Kronos and who his siblings are and like what happened there and how he came to be the king of the underworld?
Sure. So, so in Greek mythology, there are generations of gods. And so the Titans, the Titan generation, Kronos is the king of the Titans. Kronos is basically associated with time, and more specifically, time as sort of an all-consuming destructive force. And there's a prophecy that Kronos will be killed by one of his children. And so every time he has a children with Rhea, who is the queen mother of the Titan, he swallows the child, basically. So yeah, so he's swallowed Hera, Hestia, Demeter. Hades is born. He swallows Hades. He swallows Poseidon. But when it gets to Zeus, Rhea decides to trick him, and so she feeds him a stone instead of the baby. And eventually Zeus gets a little older and decides decides indeed that he needs to rescue his siblings and eliminate his father. And so he basically gets Kronos to swallow him and like also like an emetic potion, right? So Kronos basically throws up all of his children, and they're kind of taken under the wing of the Cyclops, and they're given different weapons, and some of the other some of the other gods of that generation sort of align with them, and they enter into this long war with Kronos, and they eventually defeat him, and they imprison him. He is imprisoned in Tartarus, which is the deep sort of pit of punishment in the underworld. And but they decide that since Kronos was kind of ruling over many different areas, and so now the powers are kind of realigning and rearranging, Zeus and Poseidon and Hades draw straws for the different realms. And we're talking about the realm of the skies, the realm of the seas, and the realm of the underworld. And Hades draws the short straw, so he gets the underworld, which was seen as the the least desired place.
Right.
So,
Courtney.
although Hades is of the Olympian generation of gods, he's not considered an Olympian himself. He doesn't live on Mount Olympus, and he is basically in the underworld most of the time, managing his own realm, and doesn't really interact in a lot of the, squabbles and fights and other things that go on with the Olympians up top.
Yeah, that was a fascinating point. And I thought it was very interesting because like he drew the short straw and kind of looked around sad as everyone went off celebrating, and he was like, but then it was interesting how you wrote it because you said Hecate said, "Come on, Hades, let's go home."
Yeah.
And
So,
him, yeah.
yeah. I actually particularly loved that little glimmer. So, for people that may not have the book and may not be familiar, each chapter starts out with a bit of prose that's in Hades' voice. And the way that I developed that is I have a practice of going into trance journey and speaking with Hades and asking him about these specific parts of the mythology, and asking him to retell it to me in his own words, and for a modern audience, like what he wants, how he wants to be presented. And all of those lovely little things that you're picking up on, like Hecate holding his hand and asking him to come home, those came from him.
I love that.
I
I
didn't
thought it
make
was
them
so
up.
beautiful.
There were so many times when I was, channeling the stories and coming out of trance journey, and I'm scribbling down as fast as I possibly can, trying to remember the details of things. And I'm also crying
Yeah.
because I'm like, this is so beautiful and heartbreaking and amazing. So, yeah.
Yeah. I thought it was beautifully done. And actually, there's one that I want to ask you to read, or since you can't see me, I can read it for you. But before we even go there, what he discovered when he went below the surface, because it's the underworld is anything under the surface, and
Right.
he helped conquer Kronos by wearing the helmet
Yeah.
of invisibility.
Yeah.
So
So the Cyclops, they're the three brothers, and they make weapons. They make magical weapons. So they made Zeus's thunderbolt. They made Poseidon's trident. They give Hades a helmet, like a sort of like it's the helmet on the cover of the book, but it's like so what you'd imagine like an ancient Greek or Spartan type helmet.
yeah,
And but it's the helm of invisibility. So the wearer is cloaked in invisibility and shadow and can't be seen, and that allows him to sneak up on Kronos.
fascinating. So then there's so many parallels with that invisibility, or that which cannot be seen by the human eye, and that
Right.
which eludes our understanding,
Mm-hmm.
that's associated with the underworld. So
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
they descend to the underworld, and it's discovered that it's rich with minerals and nutrients and rivers underground, and it's a whole world unbeknownst to the living. So can you break it into just simple terms, like what does that look like? Because there's different regions and
Yeah.
aspects, even where the different people go to live after they pass. Oh, a question says, is that why people say you can't see his face when he comes to you?
Sometimes. I mean, it depends. I think that it depends on whether or not he wants to show himself fully. When I go into detail later in the book about how I feel like I met Hades as a child, and I don't think that I saw him fully then. I just got a sense of his presence. I think that he is very discerning as to whether or not he will scare or startle you, and so you may not see him fully in his entire aspect at first. I think that might have something to do with it. Just to answer that
Yeah.
question. Yeah. But the underworld is it's a vast place, and in different fragments that we have left behind from poets and playwrights and philosophers, they describe different areas differently, but there are some commonalities. And the basic thing that I want to get across is the underworld is where all mortals go between lifetimes. In the ancient Greece of Greek mythology, there is a belief in the transmigration of the soul, right? So when you die, you go to the underworld, you stay there until you choose to be reincarnated. Now, where you stay is kind of up to how you were, what you were like when you were alive.
How you lived, yeah.
Yeah, how you lived. So most people that are neither good nor bad, they're just people going about their lives, will go to the asphodel fields, which is it's described as sort of a gray, like in-betweenish sort of area. When I see it in my trance journeys, it reminds me an awful lot of the airport. Like when you're in between planes or you're in between flights and you're just kind of drifting around the airport waiting to go somewhere, that's what it really reminds me of. And it's not, you're not nobody's tormented or anything like that. You're just kind of waiting for the next life.
Yeah.
If you were initiated into one of the mystery cults, or you were particularly virtuous or a good person, you go to the fields of Elysian, or the Elysian fields is kind of called, both things. But and that's kind of a place that's it's got like orchards, there's honey, people are laughing. It's just kind of a generally like happy place to be. And if you achieve
That's like the Delta Lounge, or like
exactly,
the Amex Lounge.
you're upgraded to the lounge. Yeah, you're happy. People are serving you drinks. There's a nice place to rest. And if you achieve the Fields of Elysium 3 times, then you go to the Isles of the Blessed, which is kind of like, it's kind of like this ultimate staycation, like all-inclusive resort. Right?
Nice. That's what the party is.
Yeah, and some heroes of mythology, in their stories, it says that they go to the Isles of the Blessed when they die. So those are the basic places. There is also Tartarus, which is Tartarus. I liken it to a black hole almost. Like it's a very deep, very, very black, very dense place.
Right.
And it's where sort of the worst of the worst are kind of they're kind of trapped there. So for example, Kronos is there.
Right.
That's where they put him after the war, right, between the Olympians and the Titans. And not a lot of mortals get sent there. There are some mortals kind of around that have done different things, but they're very few and far between. It's you have to really be the worst of the worst.
It's like a punishment. They stay there.
Yeah.
They don't come out of it.
Yeah. So those are kind of the main places where shades are dwelling. And then of course there's the halls of Hades, where Hades lives and Persephone lives when she's in residence with him. And then there's, there's different rivers in the underworld. There's different pools. There's a lot of land features that I don't want to go into because that'll kind of take forever to talk about them all. But and each kind of river or pool and different land features has sort of a daemon, or like sort of a spirit, or, which is like kind of like not really a god, but not really a human, but not. It's kind of a very in-between sort of being that inhabits all of these things. And then there's a whole host of other characters that live in the underworld that either have like very specific jobs, or they kind of go back and forth between the underworld and the world of the living. And so it's a big place. There's a lot going on.
Yeah, I think it's very cool because, oftentimes if people don't have an understanding of Hades, they just associate him with like the devil, but that's not actually his role. He's kind of like the administrator, or like the president of the underworld. And then,
exactly.
then there's delegates that are in charge of different tasks. So I just went to go see Hades Town on Broadway with my daughter 2 weeks ago, and it was excellent. It was amazing.
Yeah, it's a really good musical. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, it was great. But she's like, "Who are those 3 people?" And I was like, "Well, those are the fates." Like they're narrating, and I was like, it's kind of like the Little Shop of Horrors with the 3 girls, like, woo! But like those are the fates, and they're in charge of the timing of one's life.
Exactly.
When they're born, and then the length of their death, and then when they're gone. So, and I think that's interesting that there's judges that determine when a soul passes and comes to the underworld and becomes a shade, the shade of that person. Where do they go for their time? Do they go to the field, or do they go to the good place or the bad? So
right. And the judges used to be mortals themselves. They were, sort of elevated to this position for being particularly just justice oriented or virtuous in their lives. So yeah, and it doesn't include Hades. He's not one of the three. So
And then also Persephone. Now tell me, why do you call her the Dread Queen, Persephone?
it's it's one of her epithets. Epithet is just like a nickname, a poetic nickname, and she is often um, she's often invoked on something that was very, very common in the ancient world, the curse tablet. And the curse tablet was, it served a lot of different purposes. But I mean, as you might expect, it was, please, curse so and so until he gives back the cow that he stole, or please curse so and so in their marriage because they stole the person I wanted to marry. It's very, it's very much like you would assume. And in particular, Persephone is invoked on these curse tablets, and she's really seen as a force to be reckoned with when she's in her like fullness of being queen of the underworld. She's actually more fierce and more fearsome than Hades, because she actually does judge some people. She actually the Furies, which are also called the Eumenides, or the kindly ones. But the Furies, who are these mythical beings that can be sent out into the world to punish those who lie, those who take advantage of others, those who assault women. Persephone commands the Furies.
Oh.
Yeah, so she is incredibly formidable, and that's why she's the Dread Queen. Yeah. And it's really interesting that that role, that like amazing sort of powerful, agency that she has it when she's in the underworld, not when she's in the world above.
That's really interesting, because that character of Persephone, she's very complex,
Yes,
and
yeah,
it's
very much.
filled with duality. And also, I think it's very interesting, especially as you think about mythology, how Hades made Persephone his wife, but they do share power, and he does
They do.
consult with her, and they are a team, which is not so common with the other gods.
Yeah. Well, the underworld it's a different place. It's a place of paradox. It's a place where people, there's a lot of misfits or misunderstood individuals down there. And it's the kind of place where if you almost think that, the world is turned upside down, so someone who, who is feminine, like more feminine, can have that type of power, whereas they don't in the world above, in sort of the glittery, glamorous world of Olympus, because the women certainly don't.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's cool. For people that don't know the story about Persephone, he snatched her from the gardens. She's the daughter of Demeter,
Mm-hmm.
and got permission from her father, right?
Yeah,
Originally.
Zeus is her father. Yeah. So Greek mythology has a lot of brothers and sisters getting together. So Zeus and Demeter had Persephone, and Hades spots Persephone one day, and in the myth, Eros shoots him with an arrow, and he falls immediately in love with Persephone. And in the tradition of ancient Greece, you had to ask someone's father to marry them. Unfortunately, women were considered property, right? Property of their father.
Yeah.
So you had to go to the father and gain permission, and sometimes, pay a dowry or a marriage price for them. And so that's why Hades has to ask Zeus, and Zeus has to give permission.
But Zeus never told Demeter or Persephone, so
No.
Hades just like took her and went to the underground and like opened the earth and
Yeah.
like took her. So Demeter was like, "Where's my daughter?" and then shut down the world.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is the story that you're mentioning is basically what most people know about Hades. This is the story in the Homeric hymn to Demeter, and it's really a story more about Demeter and why we get changing seasons, right? It's not really about Hades and Persephone, although they do drive the story in some respects. And for me, this was a really difficult myth. I'm a feminist from the way back. I am not cool with women being assaulted or kidnapped at all.
Right.
Um, you know,
I do not
so
support that either.
yeah, right. Like, no,
Yeah.
we would, that is just not okay.
Yeah.
And actually, when I was considering, devoting more of my time to Hades, even way before I even took an oath of devotion to him, I thought to myself, I'm like, is this something I want to engage with? And actually, that chapter where I talk about Hades Klymenos, which is his epithet that means Hades the Notorious, which refers to this episode of kidnapping Persephone. I had to really think about that and really think about the story a lot and whether or not I could kind of reconcile these really deep, heartfelt feelings and emotions I had for Hades with this incredibly violent myth.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then he struggled with, like, am I holding her captive here, or is she here because she wants to be here?
Mm-hmm.
So when when Demeter was threatening to, freeze out and starve out the earth, and they determined that Persephone has to come up and split her time, I think it's interesting. Like, is she here because she loves me as my wife? Does she want to leave? Is she a captive, or is she here of her own free will? So the fact that when she descends, it's a question, like, she has sovereignty down there, free from her mom, and she's a woman in power, and she's with her man and her husband, and they're ruling the underworld. And then she goes up for half a year, and then it's like a very different persona. So sometimes we put on different hats for different scenarios.
Yeah.
So
and I think I talk about this a little bit more in the book. I think this myth and all of its complexity, kind of in conversation with Hades over the years, and in thinking about it, it is complex, and it is sometimes difficult, and especially if you've had trauma in your life, which should be completely respected. And I think that the complexity actually is part of the brilliance, because it is millennia after this was told. Like, it's thousands and thousands of years, and we're still talking about it, and we still can't figure it out, right?
Yep.
So I think that the magic in that is it leads to conversations that makes us kinder and more compassionate humans. It leads us into conversations where we talk about consent and body autonomy. So I think that in a way, that's a gift,
Yeah, I do. I think there's so much here. I'm looking for the I'm looking for the notes of, like, what passage I wanted to read, because I remember reading it and I was like, wow, that was beautiful. And it was like the way that it was one of your channels. It'll come to me. I'm not trying to be rude by looking away.
Okay.
But I mean, like, I took pages of notes and I was like, oh, this is so cool. I want to talk about this. I want to talk about this. I mean, it's so neat. But one of the things, read this passage, 33, 34. I wrote beautiful.
Okay,
hold on. Let me see. 33, 34. Do you have your book here?
I do have my book.
Would you like to read it, since you are the author and you're very eloquent?
Sure. Okay. All right. So this is post of many. This is So where we're picking up in Hades' story is right after he and his siblings have defeated Kronos, and Hades has drawn the last straw, and this is where we're entering the myth. Okay. So this is it's told in Hades' voice. How small the straw looked lying in my palm, the third lot, the underworld. I stood stunned while my brothers congratulated each other on their destinies. They slapped each other on the back, relieved, laughing in celebration. My face remained stoic as the sunlight began to fade. A sinking feeling invaded my gut, and one by one, I watched my siblings depart for their new realms and responsibilities. I closed my eyes tight against the inevitable. At length, I was left standing alone, or so I thought, until I felt soft fingers slip into my own. Hecate the goddess who allied with us against the Titans, squeezed my free hand. Hades, let us go home. I followed Hecate beyond the great river of Oceanus, past the setting sun, and then down, far below the earth, to a liminal realm hidden from the living. Behind its shroud of mist, the underworld was not at all the empty void that I had feared it to be. There were mighty rivers to explore, landscapes to chart, fields to cultivate. And I was not alone. Other deathless ones, such as Nyx, Erebus, Charon, Thanatos, Kerberos, the Morai, and Minoetes, live here. They welcomed me as their leader, and eventually I built a home for myself, the halls of Hades, and I planted an orchard of pomegranate trees. It was not long before the shades of mortals began arriving on my shores. These days, I watch from my balcony as shades drift aimlessly across the asphodel fields. This balcony is where I retreat when I need a few moments to myself, my favorite spot in the halls for quiet contemplation. Mortal shades appear gray, amorphous, ephemeral, sometimes melancholy. But the shades floating in the asphodel fields never fail to renew my spirit because of one simple reason. Within their shadowy frames, I can still see the faint yet ever-present glow of their souls, delicate, golden, and precious. They rest here in my fields for a time until they are ready to be born again and re-enter the great cycle. I watch over and care for them, and I am uplifted by their infinite potential.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just think that is such a beautiful description. I mean, most commonly people think of like, oh, death, you're 6 feet under and it's darkness and that's it. The end, period. There's nothing more. But yet there's so much more. And it's so beautiful because he's giving them a place of rest and respite and reprieve before they have a brand new opportunity for a whole new cycle of life. And he is excited for the infinite potential that lies ahead. I just think it's such a beautiful perspective to consider, you know, because there's so much more than we can possibly understand, right?
Yeah, it's interesting when so before I wrote the book, in Trance Journey, I would be talking to Hades within the halls of Hades, and we would be standing at this balcony. But I was always standing kind of with my back to what would be off the balcony as I was chatting with Hades. And then one time, I was writing the book, and in particular, that chapter 2, is all about the underworld and the different places in the underworld. And I said, Hades, what do you want me to write about the underworld? And we were standing on the balcony, and he said, turn around. And when I turned around, it was the first time that I saw that visual image of the shades of mortals glowing, like almost like they had a lantern in their chest, sort of that glowing orange-yellow image. And it was just really beautiful. It was so beautiful to see. It was like a field lit with fireflies. It was amazing.
That's what it was reminiscent of as I was reading it. I was like, that is just such beautiful imagery. Congratulations on writing it so beautifully, because that definitely was conveyed to me. I think it's great. Now, if somebody wants to start working with Hades, you do a lot of discussion and inclusion about different correspondences and symbology, and like how you can wear different items, or you can create an altar that's personal to you. Can you talk a little bit about that with our readers, just so that our visitors, so that it doesn't have to be this big intimidating thing? You issue endless ways to work with them.
Yeah, there are endless ways, and some of them are very simple, right? So I like to build altars, and I have several altars. Kind of, I think my house is kind of a big altar, um, which some of you who are tuning in with us can probably identify with that. Um, as witchy people, that tends to happen.
Yeah.
And I think the whole point about an altar is, especially for someone who is the host of many, you're offering a space to host him in your life and in your home and in your heart, right? So it's something that really connects with him. And you don't have to have a lot of fancy things. In the book, I go through a lot of correspondences, and there's a lot of different plants, there's a lot of different animals, you know, and that you can kind of start simple, right? And you can kind of build it up as you go along. But just making that space for him. And I love the comment. It's always like, oh, this is a flat surface. It would make a great altar.
Totally.
I
Every
can identify
circle, I'm
with
like,
that.
ooh, let me put some
Yeah, so
trees
make
here.
make a space for him in your life. That's kind
Yeah.
of an invitation for him to come in, right? And another really simple thing to do. There's a lot of hymns. There's a hymn in each chapter of the book. The time of the day that's particularly sacred to Hades is sunset twilight. So when the sun has just gone, just barely gone beyond the horizon, and there's sort of liminality, it's a good time to read a hymn. The hymn, just very simple, very short. You can also just kind of incorporate him in how you dress, kind of like wearing specific colors, maybe wearing things that are a little bit underworldy themed, scent, things that smell like him. One thing that I do every day is I make my own little essential oil blends, but you could just use a perfume roller or whatever you wanted to. And I get out of the shower and I draw like the astrological symbol for Pluto on my wrist, kind of as a way to connect with Hades and to put protective sigil on my skin every morning.
Yeah.
Things that are really simple like that. One thing I love to do, this is really simple, because Hades, one of his epithets is Pluton. So he's called the wealthy one, right? Because he has fertile soil and minerals and stones, all of those things,
All the
metals in the
crystals.
earth. Yeah, all the crystals.
Yep.
So what I like to do is get my wallet out, and I like to take out all the dollar, like the paper money, and I like to, align them kind of in order and put them all the same way and put them back in my wallet. I take out the receipts that I don't need. I like count my coins and put them back in. And I do that with an intention of devoting that activity to Hades. And that's like really simple, right?
I like that. I like that. You also say to wear lots of bling, gold and
Yep.
silver, because he is associated
Yeah.
with abundance.
Uh, yeah. So it was funny. I talked about this with Samantha. We had a really funny kind of 5, 6, 7 minutes of talking when we chatted about Hades likes to dress up. And glamour and feeling like you look good and wearing bling. I mean, that can happen at kind of all levels, right? That doesn't have to be expensive. I'm a huge thrift store lover, love thrift shopping.
Yeah.
In fact, this lovely panel that you see behind me was
I
thrifted. um,
love that.
Thank you. Um, so I actually love to kind of take him with me when I go places. I'm like, okay, Hades, like if there's something in here that would really suit us, kind of like draw my eye to that, okay? Because he loves to go shopping.
I like that. I get the sense that it's almost very like Tauran energy. Like he likes to have opulent, nice
Mhm.
things surrounding him,
Well, I
like
mean,
rich
he's
textures.
a chthonic, earthy king, right? Yeah. So it's very
Yeah,
Taurian. Yeah.
yeah, totally. And correspondences that people can use. You mentioned some darker crystals like smoky quartz and black tourmaline or brown tourmaline. Um, obsidian, I think you had mentioned.
Yeah.
Um, and
I mean, basically all crystals come from the earth, right? But I
yeah,
think that the ones that are dark in color particularly resonate with him
yeah,
well. Yeah.
yeah, as well as amethyst you mentioned, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then animals, you mentioned animals. I like the idea of creating a delicious cake as your sacrificial lamb, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. So, Hades is identified with black rams, and for a couple of reasons. One of his epithets is Eucaetes, and it means the beautiful haired one. And
Mm,
it's said that he has like the beautiful, like dark black curly hair, like a ram would.
yeah.
And also, in Homer, when Odysseus wants to travel to the underworld, he's commanded to sacrifice black animals. It was pretty common as a sacrifice to Hades. And so I write about the fact that although there are other cultures that do animal sacrifice around the world, and that's a completely like valid and respectful practice, it's
Right.
not very common where we are.
Right.
So I mentioned making a little cake instead, that you can make a little cake and offer that as your sacrifice. So black rams. He's also associated with let's see. Oh my goodness, there's so many. There's bats, cicadas, screech owls. That's on the list.
Yeah.
Dogs, especially Kerberos, his three-headed
Yeah,
dog.
the three-headed dog. That's so cool. So that dog is in charge of, welcoming people and then not letting them leave.
Yeah, I love and I don't remember what bit of where it's recorded. It's recorded in a fragment of a text, but it talks about that when people come to the underworld, Kerberos greets them by like licking them and jumping on them and just being a cute puppy dog. But if they try to leave when they're not supposed to leave, then he turns into a vicious guard dog. So,
Doesn't he eat them?
he probably I would think he would attack them, but he probably doesn't eat them. I'm not sure. I'll try to look for examples of Kerberos eating somebody. But and also it's funny there. I love the part of the myth also, and this is from the myth of Heracles, or as people often say, Hercules. One of the labors that Heracles had to perform was to retrieve Kerberos from the underworld. And as he pulls Kerberos up to the surface, he's like growling and drooling, and saliva's flying everywhere. And everywhere that the drops of his saliva land, it turns into wolfsbane, or monkshood. Sometimes it's also called that.
Wow.
But yeah, so it turns into like a baneful plant. So there's lots of fun stuff in there about Hades' dog.
That's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. And he's got like a serpent's tail, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's like many things. He is described various ways throughout different fragments of text, but normally you see the most descriptors of him as having 3 heads and a serpent tail, and then perhaps like kind of a ruff or like a mane of like little snakes around his head.
Wow. I wouldn't want to run into that dog.
Pretty fierce, yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
It's just so interesting. Vinny, who works in the shop, he said, Hades kind of seems like he would be a celebrity.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
He's well, he's got that sort of charisma and magnetism to him, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
I think his
Definitely.
brothers do too. I think Zeus has that. I think Poseidon has that. They just, because of their different personalities, it comes out differently
Yeah,
for all of them.
totally. So it's funny actually. We lingered in the theater after seeing Hades Town because we like went up to the restroom and like waited for the crowd to clear. So as we were coming down, the gentleman that played Hades was actually like at the theater door as we were leaving, and he was just the warmest, nicest presence. And I just said, "Gosh, you were fantastic!" And he just had the biggest smile. I was like, "This is a good experience." So I'm a big fan of Hades.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the basis of that is your I always butcher the pronunciation. Eurydice.
Oh yeah,
The
that's
girl.
good. Yeah, Eurydice.
Eurydice.
You did it perfectly.
Eurydice. So she died and was brought down to the underworld. And then what's the boy's name?
Orpheus.
Orpheus was so in love with her. He, as a mortal, snuck into the underworld to ask Hades and win her back. And he did that by playing his his instrument and singing a song,
Mhm.
which won over the hearts of both Persephone and Hades.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's pretty
Yeah,
Lord, because
it's
then what happens? And you're
yeah,
the
it's
expert.
I don't know if I'm an expert, but thank you. So, yeah, Orpheus and Eurydice get married, and unfortunately, Eurydice dies right after the wedding. And Orpheus himself is a demigod, and he plays the lyre. So it's like this ancient sort of stringed instrument, and he sings. He like sings poetry, and apparently he was such an amazing artist that even flowers would dance in the field, stones would rock and dance when he sang.
Mm.
And so when Eurydice dies, he refuses to let her go, and he makes his way through the underworld, like playing his lyre and convincing people to let him in until he eventually gets to the halls of Hades, and he gets a chance to play. He asks, Persephone and Hades, "Can I please have my wife back? Like she's barely had a chance to live. I love her so much." And unfortunately, so Hades is known for being a stickler for the rules, and he kind of has to be a hard ass, right? Because you can't really like make a bunch of exceptions, or else it'll just be pure chaos down there all the time. And so they're like, "No, sorry, we really feel for you, but
Yeah.
no, we can't do that." And he's like, "No, but just like let me play, like let me play my lyre, and if I can move you with my song, then please let me have a chance to have Eurydice back." And so they kind of discuss it amongst themselves, and they decide to let Orpheus give it a go,
Yeah.
right? And so he does. He plays a song that is so profound and moving that there's not a dry eye in the house. Like the Furies are crying, Persephone's crying, even Hades sheds a tear. Like everybody is just,
Yeah.
in their feels. And so they're like, "Okay, Orpheus, like you win. You you win.
Yeah.
Like you can take Eurydice back, but as she will follow you out of the underworld, you cannot look back. Do not look back at her. Keep moving forward. And then once you reach the surface, she will be back in the land of the living." And unfortunately, Orpheus does not follow the advice. And just as they're about to enter the surface, he looks back and to see if she's there, if she's still following him. And she fades back into the underworld because he didn't follow the directions. Yeah.
Broke my heart. We were all like,
Oh, you're
no.
like, "Orpheus, you almost did it."
Oh, he was so close. But my daughter looked at me and she goes, "Mom, I don't get it. Like what? So now what happens?" So like, but this is all part of the tale, right? So what do you think? What do you think about that?
Well, Orpheus actually was a very popular mythic figure. And in fact, like there are Orphic cults and Orphic mysteries that were built around this myth because people felt like he had something in particular. He had particular knowledge because he had been to the underworld and been in front of Hades and Persephone and came back to live to tell the tale,
Right.
right? So, there were a lot of mystery cults that developed out of that whole experience. Yeah.
It's so
And I don't know, I
interesting.
mean, I don't know what Orpheus and Eurydice are doing now. I haven't spoken to them directly, but maybe I will.
Maybe that's in maybe that's the next book in the next trend.
Maybe so. Maybe so.
Cool. Yeah, no, it's just fascinating because it's the doubt that we put upon our own self, right? Like he was so close to having what he wanted and what
Yeah.
he dreamed of, and that he put so much effort into achieving, and he was like just short. It's just so often we just that doubt creeps in
Hmm.
and it can sabotage all the hard work, right?
Yeah,
But then,
absolutely. Yeah.
but then we always have a chance to give it a new opportunity of death and rebirth, right?
Yeah.
So
He'll see her again. He just has to wait a
gotta
lot
wait a
longer this
while.
time.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So what's so cool is Jamie signed some book plates. So we have signed copies and we do sell. We placed a reorder because we sold out the original. So now we have a reorder of more books. If people want to order Hades book, which I highly recommend. We're just scratching the surface and it's just so lovely talking to you. I'll over the past few minutes, like, does anybody have any questions before we close out the discussion? Because I could sit here for another hour, but I'm going to honor your time. Does anyone that's watching have a question for us? So there's been some comments like Vinny, it's funny when you were talking about Eros, he's like, my boy Eros, because
Yeah.
that's one of his, yeah. So funny. So, but didn't Hercules or Heracles, didn't he also shoot Hades with an
He
arrow
did.
too?
Yeah, and that's a really lesser known bit of mythology. I think it's in the Iliad, if I'm remembering correctly. It's in Homer, and it's talking about there's a battle that's going on, and Hades is walking amongst the dead on the battlefield, and it's not clear why. This is happening after Heracles has performed all of his labors, and he's sacking the town of Pylos or Pylos. And Hades is walking around there because he did have sort of a cult in that area, right? And so he was there. Maybe people don't really know. Maybe to assist the mortals who offered him cult in that
Right.
place, or maybe he was there to kind of assist with moving the dead along, getting them to the underworld. We don't really know why he was there, but he was walking amongst the dead, and he gets hit with one of Heracles' arrows. And the arrows are all tipped in poison. It's like the blood of the Hydra that Heracles had slain earlier. And so it's not going to kill Hades because he can't be killed, but it does make it so that he has to go and get the arrow pulled out, like on Olympus, and get tended to by a healer. And it's a really interesting little bit of mythology that's kind of tucked in there amongst a larger story about Heracles. But yeah, Heracles shot him with an arrow.
He's like, that's annoying. Why are you
Yeah,
shooting me?
yeah, which is interesting. And Hades is Heracles' uncle, like in the twisted family chart that is Greek mythology. So
They are so interwoven. It's unbelievable. All right. So Vinny said the best Hades physical manifestation, meaning animal, bug, smell, song that you know was Hades.
oh, the one that I know is Hades. Hmm. I, I think when I smell cypress, Mediterranean cypress, because that is a plant that is so deeply associated with death and funerary rites. Definitely that. Definitely the smell of cypress. In fact, there's a soap that I first found when I was traveling in Italy, but you can get it, like you can buy it on Amazon and things like that. It's called Cipresso, and it's made by Nesti Danti, and it smells so much like Mediterranean cypress, and that really, really reminds me of him. As far as animals go, honestly, and I think that animals, it's going to be different. I think that all these things can be very like highly personal.
Yeah.
But for me personally, an animal that I always associate when I see it with Hades is when I see an owl.
Yeah. That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
I love owls. They're just so mysterious. It makes sense.
Yeah.
Another comment says, "Hi, I bought the book and I can't wait to read it. I'm wondering if you have any quick tip you'd share on getting in touch with Hades as you're beginning."
Oh, yeah. I mean, we talked a little bit earlier about the altar building or the offering a simple hymn at sunset twilight, or just things like that. I think a lot of us tend to sort of rush into relationship with deities the same way we rush into new people that we're falling in love with.
Yeah.
And Hades has such a broad perspective. I mean, he sees time as like geologic time, right? Like his scale is much different than ours. So I think I would say just treat it like you're slowly courting someone, and slowly sort of noticing, um, because he's subtle. And once you once you do start to recognize him in your life, you will absolutely see him all the time. And you'll be like, how did I not notice this before? But he's so subtle that you really have to pay attention. And so I think that, it may not be, it's not a just add water answer, but I think my answer to that question is what matters to Hades is time and attention.
Mm, like that. I think Samantha is actually she blends so many beautiful oils for our shop, but one of the oils that we have is a Hades oil that
Yeah.
features all the essential oils and herb correspondences with him. So I love the idea of every day like using the
Oh yeah.
plutonian sigil.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
sigil. Yeah.
Yeah, and asking for protection and vitality. I think that's great. In a similar fashion, I work with Archangel Michael the same way, but it makes so much sense to also work with Hades in that manner. So I'm like, huh,
Yeah.
you know what? That makes sense to me. So
Yeah, and I find that Hades and the whole retinue of the underworld, they are they're very protective and they're very good allies to have. If you're wanting to feel solid and grounded and protected. I've never felt as safe as I have since I started working with Hades.
that makes sense. Well, I am excited to even just put some of these suggestions into my own practice, and it has been so much fun talking with you. I highly recommend this book to everybody. We are thrilled to have you, not once, but twice. And if you're ever in New York, come and visit us. We would love to host
Well,
you live.
I am actually in that area quite often because my teaching collaborator for Way of the Weaver lives in Vermont, and a lot of the in-person stuff we do is in the Vermont area. So it's not New York, but it's closer than where I am in Alabama, right? So I will
True.
definitely let y'all know when I'm going to be around, and maybe I can stop in and we can meet in person. That'd be great.
Absolutely. We're in the town of Amityville, which is the home of the Amityville Horror. So,
Yep,
we're steeped with
I'm
our own
familiar.
history.
I love the spooky and the paranormal, and I've watched many, many things about the Amityville Horror House.
Yeah, we actually have some paranormal investigators coming to the shop this weekend, if I'm not mistaken. So that'll be
Cool.
fun too. Yeah, we really appreciate you having the time, and we're thrilled to carry your book. And thank you for signing the book plates. And we look forward to connecting with you again.
Thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun. So, and thank you to everyone that came and listened and offered comments and questions. I really hope you enjoy it. Find me on social media and send me more questions and comments. I definitely pay attention and I do answer. So thanks, everybody.
Good. Yeah, the feedback's been really, really wonderful. So thanks so much, Jamie.
Yeah,
Take care.
thank you. Good night.
All right. Be well. Bye bye.